Hey, fellow Gen Xers, if you're like me, you probably think about how much money you need to retire comfortably quite often. And chances are you've probably heard of the 4% rule, which basically says that in order to retire comfortably and securely, you should assume you're going to spend 4% of your retirement portfolio the first year, and then you will adjust for inflation each year after that. Basically, what that means is you would need about 25 times your annual salary to retire comfortably. That's way too much. I mean, it didn't take me long to figure out that that is just absolutely ridiculous when I thought about it, because even with the minimal knowledge of investment, you can cut that in half at least. And I believe, I firmly believe that you can cut it even lower than that. And that if you're willing to do some, not all, but some of the 7 things that I'm going to talk to you about today, really you only need somewhere around 5 times your annual salary to actually quit your full-time job. Now, it sounds crazy, I know, but hear me out. Listen to some of these things, and then you can give me your feedback and tell me what you think. Number one, my favorite one is to learn about investing yourself. So, as an introvert, I love this one because it's fun just seeking out the knowledge and to fill my brain full of everything I can about investing. Now, there's some things that I personally won't do. I consider myself a moderately active investor. I don't do day trading. If that's your thing, go for it. But most people fail when they try to do that. I do like to look at technical analysis, and I kind of trust some people on YouTube, some financial advisors, or some people who have shows who seem to know what they're talking about, and I take their knowledge into consideration. But I've done a lot of research myself, and I would not personally try to day trade, but I think it's a good idea to have some knowledge that's similar to the knowledge of the people who do that, so that you can take that into account with your strategies. I'm more of a little bit of a longer term investor, but there are things that you should know, like, for instance, price to earning ratios. It's important to know that and how that affects the future price. Just macroeconomics in general. I don't know, insider buys and sells and how to look those up and how that affects the price of a stock. And you should know about dividends, what they are, how secure they can be in retirement, and know the difference between ETFs, which are exchange traded funds, and index funds, and covered call ETFs. Okay, so what are covered calls? If you learn about options, you'll learn about call and put options and the difference between those two, and what covered calls are. And covered call ETFs, I think, are very important to know about in retirement. Now, that's a lot of things to learn, but if you take it one step at a time, if you try to learn everything at once, it's going to be overwhelming if you haven't been learning along the way. But if you take it one step at a time, you can learn how to manage your own money, and you can do better than a financial planner. Believe it or not, that sounds crazy, but most of the financial planners don't even beat index funds. You have a better knowledge of your own financial situation than anyone possibly could, because you've lived through it. You know yourself better than anyone knows you. So if you have some knowledge about investing, you don't really have to. I mean, I would say don't try, as I said before, don't try to day trade and beat the people who have been playing that game for so many years and have the knowledge that they need to be able to get ahead of the markets. But if you have a little more of a long term attitude and you learn some things, you learn who to trust, and you learn who you can trust to manage your funds. And I'm not talking about an overall financial planner, but I'm talking about, like, if you buy an exchange traded fund, there are certain companies that will manage those funds for a small fee. And then you can look at the track record of those funds and listen to what the people say who manage them and kind of make your own determination. But basically, in short, is be willing to learn about investing is one of the things you can do to lessen the amount of money that you will need to retire. And for number two, think about cheaper entertainment after you quit your full-time job. Do you really need to get out as much as you have been getting out? How much social contact do you need? A lot of times that comes from societal pressure, thinking that you need social contact. And if you're more extroverted, maybe you do need a little bit more social contact, but also keep in mind that you can get social contact doing the things that you normally do without having to go out of your way to meet up with friends. And you can have conversations with people, just random strangers at the grocery store. For me, that's if I get out once a day and see some people, even if I don't talk with them, that's usually enough social contact for me. And a cheap hobby for me is playing my guitar. The equipment that I use for having a hobby like that at home is not really that expensive. And I've also started a couple of YouTube channels in addition to this one. My other channel is about just basically guitar lessons, about blues guitar. And I'm not necessarily planning to make money off of either of these channels, but it keeps me active. It keeps me busy. It helps me to socialize. It helps me to articulate, because sometimes when you spend a lot of time alone, you kind of forget how to articulate and how to speak. So this is good for me in this way, in that it's helping me to be able to continue to communicate. And it's a cheap hobby. I mean, I already have a phone and I haven't bought much equipment for this. So just keep that in mind. Maybe have some cheaper hobbies or cheaper entertainment, and that can help you. And number three is pretty important. When we're talking about having cheap hobbies and having cheaper entertainment, it also relates to owning less things, owning less material things. And usually, in general, I've done the research, and usually at our age, renting is going to be better than buying when it comes to a home. Now, that's contrary to what we've been taught growing up, and that's probably it's probably hard to swallow, and it's going to take a while to sink in. But a lot of times when people consider buying a house versus renting, they don't consider all of the expenses that go with owning a house. You have to put down a down payment that you could be investing. You have to pay property taxes. You're paying homeowners insurance. Repairs are probably going to be less than the deductible of your homeowners insurance. So you're going to be the one responsible for that. You have the stress of actually doing these repairs rather than just calling the landlord. As we get older, there are 55 plus communities that we can rent even manufactured or mobile homes in, and it's a quiet community. Not a lot of young people running around making noise, stuff like that. And there's just a lot of things to consider when you consider owning versus buying. There's a rough and dirty formula, and I don't remember exactly what it is because I've already made the determination. For me, renting is going to be better, and it's just about finding a place to live, basically. But there's a formula, and fact check me on this because I'm not sure, but it's something along the lines of, if you're considering buying a house, and let's just say, I don't know what the median or the average cost of a house is in the United States, or where you live or where you're going to live, but let's say for simplicity's sake that it's $360,000 for the house you're considering buying. Take about 10% of that, which is $36,000, and then divide that by 12. So you have a monthly, that would give you, if you divide that by 12, that gives what, 3,000? Is that right? 3,000 times 12 is 36,000. Yeah. So $3,000 a month would be, I guess, the break even point of where, if you can find a place to rent that's cheaper than 3,000 a month, then you're better off renting. And if it's higher than 3,000 a month, you're better off buying. And in most cases, you can usually find a place to rent that's cheaper, that's also comfortable. But like I said, that's a quick and dirty formula, and I'm not even sure the 10% is right. It may be more like 8% or something like that. But there is a formula for that if you look into that and maybe add some more details to the equation. But I mean, there are other reasons people want to own a home, so that's not necessarily something that you have to do. It's not that you have to rent if you want to cut your what you would need in your portfolio down before you retire. That's not one of the things that you absolutely have to do. But in general, I think you're going to be better off selling your house if you have one and finding a cheaper place, or just not buying a house if you have, especially if you haven't bought one yet at our age. And it's overrated. I mean, I owned a home for 3 years and I could not care less if I ever do it again. I like the freedom of being able to rent and being able to not be locked down except for maybe a year lease, be able to move when I want to, and to not have the pressure, the stress of taking care of the yard even, or taking care of the things that could go wrong in the condo that I live in. So I'm pretty happy with that choice. And even consider a car. Do you really need to own a car? Personally, I've decided that I do want to own a car because of the convenience and the inconvenience of public transportation where I live in Las Vegas. And it's the public transportation is accessible, but there's a lot of crime in some areas around where I live particularly, and it's just not something that I want to do. So I have decided that I want to continue to own a car, but it's not cheap. The insurance is expensive here, and just owning a car in general, paying for gas and the wear and tear and maintenance and all that, it's something to consider where you live or where you're going to decide to live. Maybe you don't actually need a car. But also traveling. So number 4 is travel less. Now, we picture traveling in retirement, and that's one of the things that is pretty common, and there's a lot of, I would say, pressure from society that that's what you want to do when you retire, is to travel to all these exotic places. And I would say in general, just my opinion, of course, if you're going to spend your money, it's better to spend it on experiences like traveling than to spend it on material things that you don't necessarily need. However, I think you can cut back your travel expenses also, because a lot of times that's overrated. The novelty wears off, especially if you have traveled some in your younger days. You know that the first time you see a place, it's kind of exciting, but generally, especially after that, I used to go on cruises at least once a year, and it was fun the first few years, and then the novelty kind of worn off. And it's still fun, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel like I need to do that anymore. I I live in the desert. I love the desert, and I'm perfectly happy with shorter trips. I do have family on the other side of the country, so there will be times when I travel to see them. But as far as my traveling in general, I have no desire to ever go out of the country again. And shorter trips are perfectly fine with me if I travel at all. I'm perfectly content to stay in the area. I mean, I live in Las Vegas, so where the hell do you go for vacation when you live in Vegas anyway? That's just a personal preference. Um, but if you're thinking about trips, just keep in mind that the shorter trips can be just as exciting, and they're a lot cheaper on gas. And if you want a change of scenery, you don't have to go very far generally. And speaking of going very far, number 5 is relocate. So if you're willing to relocate, this can cut down your expenses in retirement greatly. Now, this is kind of an exciting thing to think about when you're preparing for retirement, is looking for places to relocate if you're willing to do that. And you may ultimately decide that that's not one of the things that you're willing to do because you want to live close to family, or you're just particularly fond of the area that you live in. In my case, I'm kind of limited with that because I want to stay in the desert. I feel like for my peace of mind, I need to live in the desert. It's the way I feel right now. So I could go somewhere where the median income is a lot lower, the cost of living is a lot lower, and I would need less money to survive. However, I just really like the desert, and I have other reasons for wanting to be in Las Vegas as well. So I am not willing to do that particular thing. But if you are, or if you're considering that, just start looking on Zillow or wherever. I think it's realty.com or something like that, or whatever websites you want to look at to find places that are cheaper to rent, and also consider cheap places to buy, because I know I said earlier that generally renting is cheaper, but if you can find a really cheap place to buy, it might be a decent investment to consider also if you're going somewhere where the cost of living is a lot cheaper. And so number 6 is learn to say no. This is kind of a little bit different than all of the other ways of saving money. This is, at our age, a lot of times people depend on us, whether it's our kids or our parents or just friends or whoever. Maybe you have people in your life who are kind of depending on you financially. You can get them prepared for this ahead of time and say, listen, I know I've been very generous with my money and my time, but I'm getting older myself, and especially if you're working a job that you hate, and your time, when people take money from you, it's like taking blood from you, because money is basically the blood of life. I mean, that sounds over dramatic. It's not the most important thing in the world. It's not the most important thing for living the good life, but when people take it from you, they're taking your freedom, they're taking your time. So they should understand that at some point in time, you need to think more about yourself and to back off. Now, what are you afraid about when it comes to saying no? Are you afraid that they might start ignoring you? They might maybe think badly of you? I don't know. There's several things, especially I'm codependent myself. So saying no can be difficult and challenging. And I understand that. I realize that. However, if you prepare yourself for it ahead of time and prepare the people that you love in your life ahead of time, it can be easier. And after a while, you start to get annoyed. And that's kind of the place that you need to be. The fact that someone would have the nerve to ask you for money when you're in a situation in your life where you're preparing to not work, or maybe you don't like your job so much, or you're just getting older, or the audacity of some people to, for example, if you're in a place in your life where you're saving money and you're ignoring all these extra pleasures that other people are indulging in, and those people who are indulging in those pleasures are asking you for money or counting on you for money, that's that's just kind of shitty, you know? And you have to really get yourself in that place of mind where you don't tolerate that type of behavior. And even if you need to cut people out of your life just so that you don't have to worry about them depending on you or trying to ask you for money when they are completely capable of taking care of themselves. Anyway, in short, for that one, learning to say no can be very helpful in cut back your expenses in retirement. Number 7, I saved this one for last because this is the one where people kind of a lot of times say, oh, I don't want to do that, because you're stopping working full time. But the truth is, you do have the option of still continuing to work part time. And I don't think that's such a bad thing. If you are considering the things that a part-time job can give you that can help you, it can help you to socialize, it can help you to stay active, it can help you to be able to relate, to feel useful. Sometimes we need to still continue to feel useful, which there's other ways you can feel useful in retirement, but getting a part-time job can be very helpful for that also, if that's something in your personality that you need to fulfill. Now, you'll be working with maybe with younger generations. Personally, I kind of like Gen Z, and that is because I've spoken about this in a previous video. They've had some hardships, and when I worked with Gen Z at my last part-time job, I really actually enjoyed it. Most of the people on my team when I worked as a behavioral health technician, in a residential rehab for people with trauma and drug addictions. Most of the people on my team were from Gen Z. They were in their 20s and they were respectful of me, and they kind of, I guess, somewhat looked up to me, and we had this relationship. Maybe they were better at technological issues than I was, and they were able to help me with that. And I had more wisdom in certain areas and the types of things. Like if I would lead the groups, they were grateful that I would do that. And I was grateful that they would help me with maybe some of the technological aspects of the job. And so we seem to work pretty well together. And that's something to consider, is that it's not always negative as you get older in the workforce and technology is evolving, and maybe our brains are used to something that's not so overwhelming. You can work with people who are better at that kind of stuff and kind of take up for your weaknesses, and teams are good because a good team, everybody makes up for everybody's weaknesses. And I'm kind of rambling now. Sorry, I am running out of things to say here, but I feel like there's more to say. So I'm going to wrap it up there. But basically, those are just 7 things that can help you when you're thinking about retirement to not be so overwhelmed with how much money that you need. This is just a rough estimate for me personally. I feel like 5 years salary is enough if you're willing to do about 80% of these things that I've mentioned, and just to be mindful about where you're headed and not just think about saving so much money. Because what happens when you continue to try to save more and more money is you're adding stress to your life, which may cut into your years. Your goal should be the good life, right? I mean, I'm saying should. I should not say should statements, because I'm only speaking from my point of view. But in general, we want a good life, and retirement is just a vehicle to that, because at some point you don't want to trade your time for money anymore. But there are other ways to think about that than just saving up as much money as you possibly can, so that you have to give 0 time to people in the future, or maybe you're focusing too much on security, which is an illusion anyway. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there, and I hope you found this information useful. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel, and I will continue to improve. I know I kind of stammer over my words still a little bit, getting comfortable with the camera. But if you like the video and you subscribe, you're showing me that this is helpful, and it will cause me to continue on my path here and evolve for myself as well as for you. Thank you. Have a great day.